It goes without saying that every revolution is presented as a group thinking, with group benefiting and entire societies flourishing, and milk and honey will be available for all. That is not true. However, I remember as a child who fought and bled in the 1991 revolution, which resulted in civil war. I realized that revolutions are a product of one man's desire and needs. Perhaps a few, but that's all. It's always one man or the group of people together say, let's go start something because we think that's great. Let me share something with you. I fought for democracy against communism, yet all I knew all my life was communism. That's the irony. For those who don't know, every revolution begins slowly and easily in the dark shadows of the night, in basements, and the first acts of disobedience to the government are either posters on the street, slogans, ruin public property, and gradually people from those loud gatherings began to arm themselves. And Bob's your uncle. You have a revolution. Revolution starts, and then the government use all the means on their disposal and they try to crush every revolution. Needless to say, revolutions are far less likely to occur in Western countries than in Eastern Europe, Asia, or Africa. And why is that? Well, I'll not answer for you. I'll leave that answer up to you. Now, so let's get into idea and practice of revolution. And in this podcast, we'll explain why the October Revolution isn't what you have been told. This chapter of the Russian revolt began with the Russians' enemy during World War I. And that enemy is called Germany, and then was called Empire Germany. Let me just introduce myself. Firstly, let me welcome you to my podcast, Life the Battlefield. I'm the hero you never knew you needed. My name is Bekes. I'm the Guinness World Record holder. As well, I spent 1,800 consecutive combat days, 5 years in a row, in a war. War is a hell is war. And from that war, I come working in military security intelligence services, later in diplomatic intelligence security services, and then I transfer myself into the corporate world, of course, naturally. I become old. So I start writing books, lecturing and presenting. So I'm the bestseller book author. My books are a part of talking about war, my experience, about espionage, about investigations and interrogations. And today, we're going to talk about this chapter called Russian Revolution and why you are not being told entire truth. Now, before we continue, let me ask you a few easy questions before we begin. Of course, you can subscribe, share, like, and comment. But the question I do have for you, it is, what revolution is? What exactly does revolution mean? Do you know? A part of the meaning, what revolution actually represent? And how does a revolution come about? Need to do some historical knowledge share. So the term revolution is derived from the Latin word revolutionem. I think I pronounced properly, revolutionem, which means a turn about. Well, it's an only twist. Do you agree? Maybe not. A revolution is a rapid and substantial transformation of society state, social, ethnic, or religious structures. And I witnessed this with my own eyes. I was 18 years old and I got to fight for democracy from communism. A revolution is defined by the attempted change of political regimes, massive social mobilization, and efforts to compel change by non-institutionalized techniques such as large demonstrations, marches, strikes, or violence. Hence why the unions were the useful tools in beginning of the 20th century. But later on, the unions lost every meaning and every on their disposal because the unions being absorbed by the communist society. I know because my father was a very low educated person. He was a peasant, 4 years of primary school, 4 grades. Yet he was being told that it's a good thing to become the president of a union because that's what the communist workers do. And they get responsibility even they are not educated. Of course, that bited him for his ass later on because they blame him that he done the fraud thing and he didn't. Of course, he didn't have a clue what's happening there. So that's to say, unions, you can throw them to the window. They are just a bunch of useless and non-threatened existent activities or organizations for societies. They can do, we want more salaries, this and that, but that's it. Now, come back to revolutions. Revolutions and unions are combined together at the beginning of the 20th century are the powerful force. Revolutions have occurred through the history and they continue to do so. What they differ, it's significant in terms of the tactics, success, failure, lifespan, and underlying ideology. And I do remember, even we fought for the democracy, my late president was very much afraid about people. Would they turn against him? Revolutions can begin on the periphery with guerrilla warfare or peasants' upheavals, or on the inside with the urban uprising and regime overthrows. Question for you, what do you think, what type of people will never be the part of revolution? You correct? Yeah, that's correct. Politicians, they never do nothing. They come at the end. And they know how to be in a balance between the revolutions and the government, and that's what it is. However, revolution eats own children. We come to this a little bit later. Repression, corruption, and military losses can leave regimes open to what? To revolutions. Particularly corruptions. I only mean democratic society here in Australia. Sometimes, I try to understand how we live in a communism. But yet, in communism, even you being squashed and pushed against the wall, revolution happens. Revolution ideologies and forms of government such as nationalism, self-determination, republicanism, liberalism, democracy, fascism, socialism can spread through the world system. The revolution can be understood in three ways. Three ways a revolution can be divided. One is psychological, second it's sociological, and thirdly it's politically. So, psychologically, that means the general public's displeasure with the state of society, and politics is the primary driver of revolution. Sociologically, society as a whole is out of balance with respect to diverse demands, resources, and subsystems, political cultures, and list goes on. And thirdly, political conflict occurs when competing interest groups clash. That's what when you hear somebody, I want to save my country, you sold my country. According to this paradigm, revolutions occur when the two or more groups have the resources to use force to achieve their goals, but they are unable to reach an agreement inside the traditional decision-making process of specific political system. That being said, revolution will happen when you least expecting. The American, the Russian, Chinese, and French revolutions are among the best known historical revolutions. Do you agree with me? Because of the tremendous losses. Before we dig deep into the October Revolution and how that reflecting today's society and what actually happened, I'm glad that we brushed it and we learned it quickly what revolutions they are. Revolutions is not only what you being presented. I'm talking about my friends here on the West. I was born in communism. And in communism, we never spoke about revolutions in America or, the French. It was a part of the history classes, right? But never said it's good or bad. It was always in communism, and socialism was a very important imperative for you to understand. That imperative is as follows. In communism, communists need to delete entire history to suit narrative today. And they will speak today so they can, in future, they can stay on a power. That's the communism. When you start deleting past and then you rewriting the past, the history. But we learn a lot in communism about Western societies. As today we know France and in America. We know a lot about these revolutions. We learn, how bloody they are and why they started, but always started with a one-man idea. And it's always involved underground. But why October Revolution is important for this podcast? October Revolution, it's everything what we know today. We have the blue carbon copy to the decades from October Revolution. But October Revolution didn't start with the one man only. That one man needs support. Every revolution needs support. And sometimes that support comes from the fiercest enemy. Now, let's go start talking about October Revolution. Russia, history and communism, or the Bolsheviks, they rise to power. So October Revolution started on November 7, 1917. Imagine, it was evening. and the hands struck 9 o'clock. Boom! The charge was announced with a shot from the cruiser Aurora. Soldiers shelled imperial troops. Workers, sailors, and communist revolutionaries went to St. Petersburg Winter Palace with the goal of deposing the current administration and installing the new one that would represent them. Sounds simple. Soldiers who are supposed to protect the hierarchy and the government go against the government. This marked the beginning of the October Revolution, one of the most major historical events of the 20th century, which will bring about a slew of changes, most notably political ones, first in Russia and then through Europe and the world. That being said, according to historians, the October Revolution saw an abrupt shift of power in Russia. Russia, as we know today, it was born in blood. Question is, why Mario say this to us? We want to know how it started. Let me tell you how this started. It started on the 9th of April 1917. There are the 32 Russian immigrants at the Zurich station, ready to depart. Zurich, Switzerland. 32 Russian immigrants in Switzerland, ready to depart. They are not only ones who have arrived. Some in the crowd cry at them, traitors, thieves, pigs. However, people who support them also sing revolutionary songs. Now you ask yourself who they are. As I said, that's happening in Zurich in Switzerland. Despite the fact that the disturbance temporarily blocks the tracks, the train continues to go. Now the Germany fits into this role. There's a German Emperor Wilhelm II provided this train with the purpose of speaking a revolution in Russia. So the German Emperor gives a train, go in Russia, speak up a revolution. Lenin, also known as Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, sits in one of these carriages. German supplied. He leaves his exile in Switzerland with the German support and arrives in Petrograd a week later. The February Revolution in Russia concluded and Tsar Nicholas II was ousted. So, that's for the start. But there is a continuity of this story. Revolution doesn't always stop. As I say, revolution eats own children. As a result of this prolonged fighting, the civil administration is unstable, the atmosphere is chaotic, people are starving and they are unhappy. So we have a revolution because we are unhappy, we are starving. We have a revolution, but we are still unhappy and starving. Now, all of this suggests that a significant upheaval could occur in a few months' time. No question asked. People are hungry. People want to eat. But the question we gonna today elaborate and find the answer in that elaboration, it is what Germans' role they play. Berlin pays special attention to the travels of famous Russian refugees. Lenin was able to enter Russia. And we talk about First World War, so Switzerland is a neutral country. Germany is still fighting on Eastern Front Russia. However, the Russians, let's go call this intelligence services, they come in touch with the Lenin and say like, look, we're going to give the train and going to Russia, they're going to do something and we will not attack you, don't attack us, whatever it is. I know you people are hungry, we are hungry, but Germans needed those troops in East to fight on the West. But the West never understood its capabilities of the German intelligence services because they always counted that, being the cousins with the cousins, married with the cousins and the kids with the cousins, the Russian emperor, he was, somehow related to the Russian emperor. The Russian emperor was related to the Queen of England. They're all related. So didn't think very much people in the West how this is going to play, with them. But Germans find a way. Lenin was able to enter Russia. He's behaving exactly as we have instructed him. The German Army Supreme Staff wrote to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, German Army Supreme Staff writes to Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He is behaving exactly as we have instructed him. Wilhelm II, a monarch and ardent conservative, appears to be siding with the communist Lenin in what appears to be political quandary. Germany and Austria-Hungary have been at war with the Russian Empire since 1914 because the Russians want to help the Serbians, and as you know, those who don't know, you can Google it, First World War. And Berlin's goal is to significantly weaken that alliance. As a result of Lenin and the Bolsheviks, the stabilization of Russia, Berlin calculated that German military units might be shifted from the Eastern Front, as I say, to the Western Front during World War I. The plan was much more effective than expected when revolutionary Russia surrendered and a major amount of its territory to Germany in its Brest-Litovsk Treaty. That's how it's done. Don't forget, there's a classic phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Accurately defines the connection between the king and Lenin. But the person who proposed such an alliance is even more intriguing. Now you ask yourself why this alliance is more intriguing. Well, let's go say his name. Let me state his name. His name is Israel Lazarevich Helfand, sometimes known as a Parvus or Maleny, and he was a lone combatant. This was a wealthy Russian Jew who had earlier recommended to German envoy in Constantinople at the end of 1914 the Russian proletarian feast and Prussian bayonets join forces. So that means let's go crush Imperial Russia. According to Parvus, Germany and the Russian revolutionists share the same goals. Well, is that true or not? We can argue about this one, but they have a common enemy, that is true. Initially suspicious, he later secures a Berlin appointment, and that's start something what's called Salon Revolution, revolution in salons, where the elite sits, drinks and eat. Helfand first visited Germany in 1891. He was content to live in grandeur and surrounded with beautiful ladies. He loves luxury, jet setter. Influence at those times. Now, under several names, he publishes 2 revolutionary newspapers and contacts with the most notable revolutionaries of the day, including Karl Kautsky, Leon Trotsky, Lenin, and a lady called Rosa Luxemburg. However, due to his non-socialist lifestyle, his comrades did not have much trust in him. Because, when you are socialist in communist, you're supposed to behave as a priest, but, till revolution is not over. Helfand and Trotsky were among the first Russian refugees to return home following the Cold Something Bloody Sunday on January 22, 1905, when the Russian Tsar ordered the shooting of protesters in Petersburg, killing over 200 people. That was a call for action. They both rose to prominence as workers' council leaders, union, but the police apprehended them one after another. Helfand is imprisoned in a very well-known place called Siberia, but escapes and establishes himself as a businessman in Istanbul. So he goes from the freezing, Siberia to warm Istanbul. He amasses a wealth through business and imports, eventually owing many banks. Now has a lot of money. As a result of everything, his fellow communists publicly rejected him. Trotsky even wrote an obituary to living friends. We don't want you because you are now the capitalist pig, you have banks. However, when the war broke out in 1914, Parvus, so-called codename Parvus, was given another opportunity to create greater politics. In February 1915, the German ambassador in Turkey assigned him a post in Berlin. Without hesitation, the revolutionary established what amounted to smuggling business in Constantinople, or present-day Istanbul. So, either you choose, it's correct. However, his channels were extremely helpful to the revolution. He arrives at the Berlin Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That was a conference, well prepared with a written schedule for the revolution that eventually fills out nearly completely. Don't forget one thing, when you come to the government and say I want to go back and do revolution, they're going to say well, excuse me, why are you telling this to us? We can't just do revolution in another country. But that's how it is done actually, even today. You go into somebody who knows somebody and they have something what you need to start a revolution. So in 23 pages, he discussed what? Lenin's release to Russia. The weapons and the money that will be supplied to the revolutionaries. And the final fall of the Russian government. That's correct. Because Russian government was counting then on help from English and French. Berlin was also pleased. A month later, at the Imperial Treasury Office, sanctioned 2 million Reichsmark. In the time of the war, in those days, 2 million is a lot of money. For what? For the support of revolutionary propaganda in Russia. Propaganda. Do you understand? So we're not talking now, we're going to send the weapons, we're going to send the experts. Propaganda, because the guys, what the most political establishment doesn't understand, particularly on the West, doesn't matter what you do, the people are still talking. If we go a little bit more in a more modern history, those who do remember, there was a Arab Spring Uprising. Even it was not a spring, but they called it a Spring Uprising because eventually they tried to replicate something that was happening in Czechoslovakia. Long story short, the governments shut down all social media, Egypt, Algeria, through entire Middle East. But people yet done propaganda. They spoke. They spoke in churches, in coffee shops, at homes, and the word spread like a wildfire. So, Germans even knew it then that propaganda is a more powerful tool than the weapons. So, Helfiand is also politically active. His business was difficult to separate from his political goals. Thus, he deals in everything and anything, including metals, weapons of course, cognac, caviar, and fabric. Those days, that was a very lucrative business. Due to the battle obstructing the road east, smuggling took place in the north between the Finland and Russian Empire, Duchy at the time. There was Sweden as well, that parts as well involved somehow. The border patrols agents were paid off and refused to allow any inspections. So you actually bribed the people on the border. Yes. If he was conveying greetings from Olga at the border, the revolutionaries in Russia were handed weaponry, dynamite, and propaganda materials. Those German gifts sank ship in Arkhangelsk and set the harbor fire. Count Ulrich von Broxdorf-Ranzenau, the German envoy in Copenhagen, directed Parvus' actions. See how he's being shifted. He did not hesitate to aid the communists because doing so would weaken the military alliance battling Germany, which was there on the east. And that's what they wanted. They wanted, Germans desperately wanted troops from the east to fight Anzacs on the west. Right, now we'll pay for the revolution in Germany on November 7, 1917, a day that will be remembered as the October Revolution. Helfiand's plan reaches its pinnacle. So he's been supported by the Germans, who are the enemy of the Russia. Now, after the civilian government is deposed, the Soviet Union seized the power, and a few weeks later, Russia declares its decision to what? To abandon the Entente, a military alliance that compromised the British Crown and France. So say like goodbye, hasta la vista, Anzacs, and all of these people there on the west. For Russia, the war had effectively ended. The revolution in Russia, headed by German Emperor Wilhelm II, cost almost $500 million today. You know when I told you 2 millions? $500 million today. For a time, Lenin was also attacked since has received financing and support from both for opponents and capitalists. So, they say like, well, you're getting money from everybody, you're not a real communist. Although he never denied it, he did say, I would add that now with Russian money will bring about similar revolution in Germany before a party meeting. So they wanted now to replicate. Thank you, Germans, but we're going to now bring revolution to your doorstep. However, the revolution was not successful. Because why? Because the Germans expected. So Russia is become country led by communists. Lenin Bolsheviks took control and overthrew Alexander Kerensky interim government because this guy was in charge till Lenin didn't say like now it's me in charge, you goodbye. They say the time for the people to take control has arrived. So we still talk about same people who are hungry, unhappy, and it's a civil war actually in Russia. It's a very, very civil war because of their engagement in the war, poverty, and the provisional government, poor performance. The Bolsheviks took advantage of populace and armies' displeasure. So they knew it. Even army, if you don't feed them well, if you don't treat them well, which is very difficult in any country when the things become very different, they turn against the government. In 1903, the Bolsheviks split from the Mensheviks to form a more radical section inside the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party. Remind us of the German East Germany, Democratic German Republic. Nothing to be democratic. They believed in Karl Marx's theories and predicted that the working class would finally overcome the capitalist economic and political dominance. The Bolsheviks believed that a truly socialist society is based on equality could only be formed if this was accomplished. They were commanded by Lenin, who following the February Revolution on 1917 returned to Russia in armored German train after the long exile. He intended for the Bolsheviks to capture control in Petrograd and then replicate the scheme in other locations. That's what Lenin wanted. So what Lenin done, he's persuaded the Bolsheviks with his personality and energy, but he required Soviet support to succeed. Soviets were workers' councils formed in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution of 1905, bringing together a diverse range of left-wing political parties, including anarchists and communists. Everybody's welcome. That's what the revolution is. I said to you this before. You know that every revolution its own children. I remember when I was in military academy, there was this lovely lady. She was educating us in one particular subject, not necessarily to discuss this on a podcast, but she said, when the Cuba revolution started, there was a guy called Che Guevara. I done the podcast about him, so you can find down a link in the comment section link on his podcast. Che Guevara headed with the revolution in Cuba. However, number two betrayed the number one. So, who was that? Well, there was a guy, Fidel Castro, who was the number two. He betrayed Che Guevara, who's been executed by the CIA in Bolivia, right? So, if you think you're going to run for the government and the country because you're just number one, you're not, because number two is going to kick your ass. Happened to Lenin with Stalin. Happens all the time. That's what the revolution is about. I witnessed this in my own eyes. I fought for democracy, but I saw how the people were disappearing around us. As soon as there's some type of status quo or some, the standby on a front line, whatever is happening, people disappear. Let's talk about back to revolution in Russia, because this is replicating even today, guys, across the globe. Russians wanted everybody in their revolution, even anarchists and communists together, which doesn't work that way. It's a big pot of everything. It's going to explode. But they were transformed into organized social and state units by the Bolsheviks regime. In his book, April Thesis, Lenin set out the goals of the Bolshevik revolutionary revolution. That's correct. Revolutionary revolution. He promised land, bread, and peace to the people under the slogan, all power to the Soviets. That slogan, all power to the Soviets, we had the same thing in Yugoslavia. All power to the, us, to the brothers and sisters. To win over the urban populace, he claimed that the Bolsheviks could address the issue of food shortages in cities. Yet, this argument was irrelevant to the peasantry who made up the vast majority of the population. Remember during the COVID, we have the clashes, they are scientists, they are doctors, they are this, they know everything. You're just a peasant, you don't know nothing. But the peasants always, consist society in vast majority. Back to Lenin. He secured the peasants' neutrality by handing them land, and he fulfilled the majority of Russians' expectations for the war's end by promising to make peace with Germany. But then comes something what's called the Red November. Lenin returns to Petrograd, determined to seize power shortly. However, the provisional government had scheduled elections for November, and he was convinced that the Bolsheviks would do poorly. This is when somebody expect that somebody else will fail. Trotsky took over the organization of the Bolsheviks coup, while the Military Revolutionary Committee, because they've been separated, gathered backing from the Petrograd garrison and Kronstadt Stelos. So they have the infantry and the sailors. On November 6, Prime Minister Kerensky attempted to limit Bolsheviks' power by ordering the arrest of leaders. Do you see how the revolution works? It's a fight on the top. Nonetheless, the Military Revolutionary Committee responded. We know how this is gonna end. Do you know? The Red Guard and Kronstadt sailors occupied critical positions around the city. In every revolution, in every government, military, it's a last line of defense. Even in Russia. So on November 7, they headed to the provisional government in the Winter Palace in response to a shot from the cruiser Aurora. A few officer cadets, Cossacks, and the, now pay attention, female death battalion were left to defend the castle, but only a handful were willing to fight. People had enough of to fight each other. However, there are some people who want to fight still. So most armed forces remained in their barracks doing nothing to prevent the Bolshevik seizure. We don't want to fight anymore. Enough. Kerensky departed the Winter Palace to what? To seek assistance. So he didn't go just voluntarily. He escaped. He escaped from Petrograd, dressed as a woman to Moscow. Before we continue with this one, I do remember 1991 when there was a roll call for every man between 18 to 65 to report to the army barracks because we need them to fight along our side. And I do remember I was being sent to the train station to pick up every man possible I can find with my unit to bring them in army barracks. And most of the men I was being dressed as a women. As a women, they escaped. So I think myself, how many trains left my city where the men, most of this was alpha male, literally alpha male, those killers, yes, exactly. They've been dressed as a woman escape. So same goes with this guy. Now he's escaped from Petrograd, dressed as a woman to Moscow. He took the train to Murmansk, which is far enough north, where he took the train to Murmansk by using documents and passport provided by who? By the Serbian officer, where he bought a ship and traveled to England, thereby ending the saga of the provisional government. So he escaped to England. Workers and soldiers surrounded the castle overnight, and on November 8th, the Red Guard rushed in and arrested several provisional government leaders. That is not the end, because the Bolsheviks took power in Russia. That is Russia revolution. What I try to explain to you to this podcast is very, very simple. No revolution start overnight. It's brewing. But sometimes most of revolution start because they've been supported by the enemy of the state. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comment section below. What do you think about revolutions in 20th century? How they be run? Why they succeed or why they fail? Thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, like, and comment. Thank you.